And hello, everyone. I'm Bill Ritter of WABC-TV, Channel 7 Eyewitness News, and welcome to another edition of The Countdown, our election coverage of the 2020 race for the White House. We broadcast on ABC 7 NY. All of its platforms, from .com to social media, you name it. If we're broadcasting it somewhere, you're going to be watching it, and we appreciate you watching it. Tonight, we're going to talk about the South Carolina primary. It happens Saturday. 63 delegates up for grabs. 54 are pledged delegates. We're going to talk about what that means. Joining us tonight, ABC News political director Rick Klein, and here in New York, political consultant Hank Sheinkopf. First, Rick, explain why the difference. Delegates versus the 54 of whom are pledged, open primary, all that stuff.
Well, South Carolina allows anyone to participate, Democrat, Independent, Republican. You just can't vote in both of them. That's the open primary piece of it, and it allows a lot of independents to have their voice, maybe some Republicans to make some trouble as well. And look, the battle is for the pledged delegates. The super delegates, leave them to the side. They're people that are going to be delegates regardless. They can decide who they want to support, and in fact, their vote could be very important down the road. But this is a battle for the pledged delegates, and it's an all-out battle right now to stop Bernie Sanders' momentum, to try to find some way to stop the front runner from getting a big head of steam going into Super Tuesday and beyond. It is also, Hank, something of a revitalization attempt for Joe Biden.
No question about it. Look, he doesn't do it, he's done. He's got to somehow get out of South Carolina, get to Super Tuesday, pick up some numbers, or you know what? He's the hope of the institutional Democrats.
Is that really the end of Joe Biden if he doesn't win South Carolina?
There's no place for him in that setting. I mean, the party has moved certainly left, and if Bernie Sanders continues, it will move further left. Where's Joe Biden fit?
It seems, Rick, Joe Biden said for so long, that his firewall was his support among African Americans. This is a huge African American state. Bernie Sanders, though, the polls show, are pretty much neck and neck with him, if we are to believe the polls.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this vote is that it is almost a perfect test for Joe Biden of the kind of Democratic support that he's banking on. The Obama coalition, African-American voters, people in the South in particular, who in the past have powered Barack Obama, have powered Bill Clinton, have powered Hillary Clinton to the nomination. If Joe Biden doesn't have them, he doesn't have anyone. And it has import in Super Tuesday states and states that vote beyond that. But it's also about the coalition that you're building. And key to the Biden appeal is that you can still win the way that you've won before. When Bernie Sanders talks about a revolution, it's also a revolutionary way of bringing a party out and activating voters. He's shown that to some extent. He's brought in crowds. He's gotten a disproportionate number of younger voters. Not clear yet whether he's actually drawn different voters into the process. And Joe Biden's challenge is to show that the old way of doing it still works and that there's still a tried and true way of winning in a Democratic primary. And that means locking down the support, particularly of African American voters, en route to a nomination.
I was at an ABC News event for people in New York this last week, and Chris Christie was there, and he said that if Bernie Sanders is the nominee of the Democratic Party in 2020, every other word out of President Trump's mouth on the campaign trail will be socialist. How devastating is that? He's a democratic socialist, which is Bernie Sanders is, which is very different than socialist, meaning somehow linking it to some sort of communist thing. And in fact, Mike Bloomberg said at a debate, and the crowd did not think that was much appreciated. How dangerous is that? How big a deal is that, Hank, for Mr. Sanders?
Very big deal in the Catholic Midwest. Socialist or communist are words that have tremendous impact. Okay, you got to look at the history of those folks. They're heavily Catholic, heavily white men, and the idea of socialism means that something will be taken away from them, including their religion. These are not people who are that far away from what occurred in Europe in their own minds.
Of course, democratic socialism, Rick, is something very different. And in fact, we have a lot of institutions in this country that we hold dear and near that have socialistic tendencies. Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps, housing, public housing.
And I wonder whether that has the same resonance as a buzzword to voters under, say, 40 or so, wherever they live. And I think the potency of that as a smear is real to certain segments of voters, but there's also segments they'll say, we already have a socialist country in so many ways, and we need more of that. We need to reduce the inequalities in this country. We need democratic socialism. And the president's going to smear whoever the Democratic candidate is. I think we know that. There's a whole lot of Democrats that think, well, let's just at least do this with someone that has pure ideas, activates the base, and can speak to the same kind of passions that maybe Trump does on the right.
Trump's job is to break up the base, to alienate voters and make that happen. He's a disruptor. Bernie Sanders is a disruptor. And Rick's exactly right. For younger people, the word socialism doesn't have the same connotation. Getting rid of student loans, forgiving them or getting rid of them somehow, Medicare for all. These are things that these younger people believe in because they feel they're excluded from the economic system.
And it was interesting, though. You listened to Bernie Sanders on his 60 Minutes interview. To both of you, this question goes, and he was talking as if he were still in the 1980s and the 70s when he talked about Fidel Castro, and he took over from a pretty corrupt guy when that revolution happened, and then he quickly became a communist. Some reason for that was because the United States ignored him, and they sort of pushed him into the arms of the Soviet Union back at the time. And if we had looked at that maybe a little more carefully, we would have taken some responsibility for that. If we had embraced some of the things that he was saying, and he was not a communist when he first took over, and he ended up inside the communist arms, and that certainly hurt Cuba to a large degree. But Bernie Sanders was saying, hey, Castro had this great literacy program, and he had a health care program, even as he was kind of a brutal dictator. That has hurt him, I think, and I want to get your take on that. The other thing he talked about was the Sandinistas. And at the time there was this civil war down in Nicaragua, and the Sandinistas were viewed as sort of revolutionary heroes, but they too proved to be kind of dictatorial. I want to get both of your takes on that. Rick, go ahead.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think one of the most resonant lines out of the debate the other night was from Pete Buttigieg talking about not wanting to go back to the Donald Trump's version of America, 1950s version of when America might have been great, right, or the 1960s, 70s, 80s version that Bernie Sanders peddles. And I think there's a generational split in the perceptions of a lot of these things. The fact that Bernie Sanders wanted to argue the merits of Fidel Castro says something in and of itself. There aren't a lot of voters who right now are having that argument amongst themselves as they think about how they can put food on the table and how they can keep their jobs and their health care and the like. And so I wonder what that contrast looks like. He's saying these things because he believes them. There is a pureness to that argument, but I don't know that it's really where a lot of voters are.
Back in the day, Hank, Fidel Castro was a absolute lightning bolt of controversy.
He still is in many ways. Look, you don't need Fidel Castro. All you have to do is say Bernie Sanders supports dictatorships. You get a Cuban who came to this country, a baby boomer or less, or the son of or daughter of a baby boomer, talking about how their families were murdered by this fascist dictator in the Caribbean, and Bernie Sanders wants to bring that back.
So interesting. Both of you had said this, and I'll just put a different kind of focus on it. Young people flocking to Bernie Sanders, older people flocking to Pete Buttigieg. How do you account for that?
It's weird, right? Yeah. The oldest candidate who would ever be elected president has a problem with older voters. There's a discomfort there, and younger voters are there. And Pete Buttigieg, all of 38 years old, has real problems on the progressive left, the younger left. It was a major moment in this campaign when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez endorsed Senator Sanders over Elizabeth Warren, over Pete Buttigieg, over anyone else in the field. And it was a reminder of what he activated in the last cycle. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of Democrats that continue to be perplexed by this. Bernie Sanders, to his credit, has been saying the same thing for 40 years.
Yep, he really
and the party has moved toward him much more than the other way around.
That's entirely true. Look, Bernie Sanders is not a lightning rod for the left. He's a lightning rod for the center and the right, and he's reflective of where the Democratic Party is going, to a very different place.
As long as you're on the camera there, where does Mike Bloomberg stand in all this? Obviously, he's not on the ballot in South Carolina. He is on all those ballots in Super Tuesday.
Mike Bloomberg is not the kind of guy that quits anything, and you can expect him, I think, to continue no matter the outcomes. And by the way, the rumor of a brokered convention, the idea of it will be something that makes him feel good, gives him a reason to hang on. And by the way, it'll give Elizabeth Warren a reason to hang on, because she is not the most pliable human being. She'll stay there till the end. Why? Just out of determination and doggedness, and to punish people.
And once again, we have Donald Trump taking to Twitter and talking about all these candidates. He says something negative, Rick, about all these candidates in the primary, which is kind of unusual. And I don't think you've ever heard of that before. And yet, he said this last week that the word is that Michael Bloomberg was so disappointed in his two debate performances that he hears he's going to quit the race.
I mean, if you're looking to Donald Trump for punditry on the Democratic Party, look elsewhere. I don't see that happening in any way, shape, or form. He's trying to needle Bloomberg right back. And Bloomberg, one of the things he's been very successful at, other than buying a lot of advertisements to the tune of $500 million, is getting under President Trump's skin. They're going both ways. They're going at it both ways. You're seeing them use some old school tactics, some new school tactics, and everything in between. Those two New York billionaires fighting each other out. And maybe it is that people that are watching this think that's what it takes to beat Donald Trump. I think Bloomberg faces, though, a potential reckoning when voters actually start casting their ballots on Super Tuesday. Do they choose him or do they not? If he's not picking up significant numbers of delegates, yeah, he could fight it through to a contested convention, but is that what he wants to be remembered for, dividing the Democratic Party in that way, or does he see his billions as more useful elsewhere?
Final thought. Donald Trump is holding another rally in South Carolina before the primary for the Democrats. He's done this every city that there's been an election or a debate. With the virus, the coronavirus, Hank, your point in conversation with me was, hey, you know, if this coronavirus is real, those great rallies, Make America Great Again or Keep America Great Again, or still, aren't going to happen anymore. The lifeblood of the Trump campaign, because it's too risky with the virus.
It is risky. Look, let's be real. You have epidemiologists of serious people saying, don't touch, don't cough into people, don't have close proximity to them. What's going to happen? You know, maybe Donald Trump will convince people that they can be well just because he shows up.
Rick, I got to wonder what it would be like to be a fly on the wall when someone proposes that to Mr. Trump, that you can't have those rallies anymore.
Good luck with that. I don't think we can possibly understand the depths of the societal, economic, and even political implications of the coronavirus. And canceled rallies. How about the conventions? How do you hold conventions if you can't have mass gatherings of people? How do you even broker that convention if you can't show up? You just Skype in. I think it's all up in the air right now at this very uncertain time, and it plays, even as you think that something like this should be apolitical, obviously responding to a public health crisis like this. I don't know how you take politics out of this moment with the Democratic primaries and with this president.
10-second answers. I know you don't like to be put on the spot, either you, about this kind of thing, but I'm going to put you on. What happens in South Carolina? Does Mr. Biden come out ahead? Rick?
Yeah, I think Biden is well positioned to win. The question to me is the margin. Does he do it by double digits or more? Because that's a lot more of a statement than squeaking one out. And a statement is what he needs and what the other Democrats need if they're going to beat Bernie Sanders.
And Biden's people want a big victory.
Clyburn guarantees a big victory. That should be the case. It's been the case historically for the last 3 presidential primaries. He's the guy. He'll deliver that vote.
That's a congressman from South Carolina, Jim Clyburn, and he got the endorsement. He gave the endorsement this week to Joe Biden. All right, gentlemen, thank you for giving your wisdom and insight to our viewers once again. I appreciate it. We'll see you next time. And that's going to do it for this edition of The Countdown. I'm Bill Ritter. I thank you so much for watching this on all of our digital platforms at ABC7 NY. For all of us here at wabc-tv, Channel 7 Eyewitness News, and for all of us who work in the digital part of it as well, thanks for watching. And join us next time for another edition of The Countdown.